But before we come to Harlem and see how all this interaction happens, we have to kind of look at how Harlem became Harlem and what brought these two groups together. And we're looking at this is an image of the main central buildings to the Columbia Exposition. And the Columbia Exposition opened in 1893. And if we all studied about Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492. So they're a year behind. It's opened in 1893. And you kind of wonder why. Well, it's just like the Olympics or anything. It's like, what city's going to get this, you know? And why not New York? Chicago? Well, New York was considered. And it was the northern end of Central Park it was going to be, and the southern end of Harlem over to the Hudson River. And they talked about the beauty of the neighborhood, and, you know, it could be Manhattan's Acropolis, and a place for the fair. And it didn't happen for the fair, but it happened in terms of development and really looking at this place and thinking, oh yeah, it would be a great place to spur middle class and upper middle class development. And so you see, they did seize the Acropolis of Manhattan. Where Columbia is today was the Bloomingdale Asylum. Some people say the use hasn't changed. But you can see the arch there for St. John the Divine, and St. Luke's is next to it there. This is the bottom loop of Morningside Park. And this postcard, this tourist postcard, those steps are still there, and that's walking up to 110th Street. So you can see the elevated train that ran across 110th Street. If any of you know Spoon Bread, the restaurant, the next time you're there, did you see a series of low buildings on that corner? And you'll see it's like a sawtooth of the buildings on the next street. That's because the train turned that corner, and they couldn't build out to that corner. But anyway, the train helped spur the development to the neighborhood. And all the universities, you know, Columbia, Barnard, St. John the Divine, Grant's Tomb, they all start seizing these spots along the Acropolis of Manhattan with great views over the plains of flats of Harlem, but also out to the Hudson River. And it's also part of the City Beautiful movement. So if you negotiate and you're in East Harlem or Harlem, you can look across certain streets, so 112th Street, and see St. John the Divine, 121st, you can still see little bits of Grant's Tomb, Riverside Church, and that's very unusual for the grid because in Paris, these cities are laid out so you can see the particular buildings, and the grid is open-ended. But in Harlem, under that City Beautiful movement, they realized they could pick spots along the drive that would be on axis with the cross streets. So that's the kind of view you don't typically see in other parts of New York. But the other side of the affair, which becomes the other side of Harlem that people don't really talk about, is that there was this amusement called the Midway parlance. And that was off of all the high and mighty that was going on. It was made to be almost like a three-dimensional museum. All these different countries had pavilions and booths, and there was these things that were there to titillate. So Ziegfeld was from Chicago, and he went to Europe and brought out Sandow, the bodybuilder, and someone else brought Little Egypt. The whole term hoochie coochie and everything comes out of this. But the streets were made to look like Egypt, or made to look at some area of some other part of the world. So people who hadn't traveled to that part of the world have a chance to sample what it might be, or at the time what they thought that that might be. And it was hugely popular, and it was organized by a man named Sol Bloom, who's in the music business, who moves to New York after the fair, and is the congressman for Harlem from 1920. It's like 1922 to after the Second World War. And he had a music publishing company and all that. So he is a musical person who's looking at all that's in the neighborhood as well. But one of the biggest attractions was the Dahomey village. They brought actual buildings from Dahomey in Africa, and a tribe of Africans who their dress, their musical instruments, and all sorts of activities around their performance. And Chicago, we know, has very horrible winters. So when the winter came, the things that were big attractions moved to San Francisco, and they had like a winter fair of some of those entertainments. And the village got there before the Africans, and actually Americans had to pretend to be Africans for a while. Burt Williams and Walker were one of them, but they stayed on when the Africans came, and they really listened to their instruments and other traditions in their music. which we'll talk about as you go forward. When I started doing my research, the interesting thing about this rag song, Harlem Rag, and it was popular at the fair. It wasn't published till like 1894, but it's the first published rag song by an African American. And it made me realize in the 1890s, why is Harlem associated with rag? It must have a musical culture here already. This is way before the Harlem Renaissance period. If they're referencing Harlem already and it's associated with black music, it made me think that there might be a community here musically as well. Now, Harlem was starting to have its own midway of its own. This is 125th Street. Where those ladies are standing is the plaza to the Harlem State Office Building, where the statue of Adam Clayton Powell is, and we're looking west. That's the elevated train that we saw in the other postcard. That's the elevated train going up 8th Avenue. And this early hotel building has been replaced by the Teresa Hotel, was at that location on the other side. And this is even before the fair. This is 1890, and you can see Ham and Harlem. Well, that's Oscar Hammerstein, the grandfather to Oscar Hammerstein we know as a musician, as the composer. So it's Hammerstein's Harlem Opera House. You can still see a house on the block. So you can see how the neighborhood's slowly developing and it's pushing entertainment. And he's looking at entertainment to the audience that he's building the opera house for. And he's looking to compete with downtown. He's looking to compete with the Metropolitan Opera. Mr. Hammerstein was not really a music person. He just loved opera and theater, and he made a fortune in tobacco processing and other activities related to tobacco. He had a patent and other things that allowed him to create a great fortune to build what he was interested in, and opera was it. And this is a picture of Lily Lerman, who was an opera singer. She came to America. She sang Norma in America 8 times, and 2 of those 8 times she sang it on 125th Street at his opera house.